So welcome to Greening Up Your Restaurant. This is going to be exciting and fun-filled. In fact, it's going to spin by and you're going to go, where did that 2.5 hours of my life go? But I'm Kathryn Cooper. I'm with the Sustainability Learning Center. I wanted to just draw your attention to the material you have in front of you. So you do see the agenda, which will take us through those steps. There is something called the Green Action Baseline. We'll talk about this briefly, but this is kind of a starting point for you to kind of start to think about how much are we currently using. For those of you who are trying to green up your energy or waste or water, it's good to know where you're starting so that you can celebrate the improvements as time goes on. And so that's we're going to use that to talk about a little bit. There is a Green Action checklist that we're going to take you through as we go through the course of the morning, as well as a sustainability policy that it's really important to kind of stop and think, okay, what do we really stand for? What is the objective for our entire greening program? So we'll be working through those materials. A few housekeeping items. I think everyone's found the washrooms. They're just through the door and down the hall to the right and left. Cell phones, if you could put them on vibrate, because we are capturing this by video today for prosperity's sake. So please put them on vibrate so we don't have to listen to them. And then finally, there's water and coffee at the back. So from there, we're going to kind of go on to the next step. So what are our workshop goals today? They're really to help you increase the sustainability of your business, because this whole greening up process is as much about economics, it's about lowering the cost of your business as it is increasing the revenue, because there's two sides to the coin here that some of you have decided to position your restaurants as green, fair trade for a reason, because there seems to be a growing interest among consumers and the public in purchasing those types of products. The other interesting thing here is that we know that in the restaurant industry margins are not very high, right? That's an understatement. So let's say your margin is 5%, so hopefully none of you are at that level, but it is a great deal easier to save costs at the bottom line. So if you want an extra $1 at the end of the day, to save $1 is a whole lot easier than to generate $20 more of increased revenue. And so it really makes a lot of sense for us to kind of focus on that whole process. So our objectives for today are really to give you some resources. So you'll see in the back of the Green Action Plan, there's going to be a series of connected links. So we're going to give that to you in a PDF form at the end of the session. We'll email it to you. And you'll be able to connect to those links. And so there's additional resources there for you. We're going to talk about that Green Action Baseline. What are some of the components you should be looking for? Go through the Green Action Plan and talk a little bit about implementation steps, because that sometimes is the biggest challenge, is how do we kind of keep this going and how do we involve our employees in that process as well. So what does it mean to be sustainable or green? Let's just kind of have a conversation around what that means for everybody in the room. So when you talk about greening up, or we're increasingly hearing this word sustainability, or being environmentally friendly or whatever, what does that mean for you?
To me, sustainability means that you're leaving the world the way it was when you stepped onto it. I have to say, one of my goals is to actually make it better and try and bring it back to the beauty that it was when people came over here.
Sure.
And
sure. So you want to get into a restorative mode,
yes,
to restore.
I'd take it one step further.
Yes, that's really interesting. Great, thank you. Anybody else? At your organization, you've been thinking about this for a while as well?
You know, we instituted a lot of things right when we first purchased our initial restaurant, right down to, where does our oil go after we're done with it?
Yes.
So it actually comes out here to Cookstown, and Wardlaw's restores it and makes it into chicken feed.
Oh, wonderful.
So there's not a whole lot of return on something like that, but you're minimizing what's going in the landfill. It can't be reprocessed, and there are uses for lots of different things. Certainly I have some concern with plastics and cans and bottles and that sort of thing. Cardboard, I think, is maybe being used more, maybe less, who knows. We've taken a very small business and made it a very large business in a very
Yeah.
short amount of time, without increasing our hydro usage, without increasing our gas usage, without increasing our garbage. We're actually less garbage than we
That's
were.
fantastic.
So those are things that we're always striving to do. You know, everybody in this room has the availability to their local hydro authority, and there's all sorts of really neat programs that nobody knows about.
Yes,
So
and we'll
you gotta
talk
ask the
about that. That's
questions.
right.
You
Yes.
know, I replaced a bunch of refrigeration equipment, and it was as simple as taking a picture of the old stuff and sending them the serial numbers on the new stuff.
No kidding.
So there's some different options up there
Sure.
that I don't think is really presented well,
Sure.
or if at all.
Yes, very good, very good. We'll get into some of those nitty-gritties and want to hear some of those stories. Anybody else who wants to share their kind of definition of sustainability, or Dan, what is, or you know, even greening, or
Well, sustainability is having a low impact on your environment, I think, is a huge part of it. From where your food is being sent from, is it being sent within your own country, is it produced within your own country? And I think a lot of people aren't aware that their food is produced in other countries and then shipped here, so there's a huge impact there. Sustainability is something like what's happened currently in Japan. With that market, now it's starting to affect China and probably Honda here in Alliston, because it's not sustainable anymore to have products produced abroad. So sustainability is using as local as possible and knowing where your product comes from.
good stuff. All right.
It could be knowing where your staff is coming from, too.
That's
You know,
interesting.
keeping your
Yeah.
money within your community.
Community,
Hire
absolutely,
local. Yeah, hire
absolutely. This idea of resilient local economies,
That's right.
you know, that we're trying to create
local. It
is,
feeds it back in.
yes, absolutely.
The people that are spending the money in the community are also the ones that should be working in your community.
Yeah. So here's my story about sustainability, and you know, we do talk about the triple bottom line. You know, it's as much social sustainability, which is in a way what you're talking about, this idea of creating this resilient local economy, as well as looking at the profit side of things. You know, decreasing our costs and improving our profit by taking more business in, and then finally about the environment. And it's kind of interesting when you think about the environmental aspect of it. You know, we're all going through this journey that starts out with these eco-efficiencies, goes to eco-effectiveness, and then maybe eventually heads into that eco-restorative component. So eco-efficiencies is all about doing sort of less bad stuff, or decreasing our costs by reducing our waste, by reducing the amount of water that we're using, by reducing the materials that we use, and of course, energy. And I'll tell you a little story that's kind of quite surprising. So there's this thing called mass balance. So in North America, they do this study on an annual basis that looks at the manufacturing of stuff, the things that we make. And it looks at all of the resources and inputs we put into making stuff, and then what we end up with in the final analysis, the finished product. So what do you think is our ability, or how much do you think our efficiency is from the percentage of what our final product is compared to the amount of stuff, the resources and inputs that go into making that? So for instance, I bought a coffee maker a few weeks ago. And so as that coffee maker was sitting on my shelf in my kitchen, it represented a proportion, a percentage of all the materials and inputs that went into it. On a per unit basis, do you think that coffee maker was 90% of all the inputs and materials that went into it? How many people think it was about 90%? You know, that we were able to take 90% of all the inputs and materials went into that coffee maker, are still in that coffee maker at the end. So no, nobody's buying 90%. What about 75%? Anybody buy 75%? 50%? Oh, you guys are good. 35%? 10%? Yeah, you're very close. It's 6%. That final product. So it means 94% of everything that was dug out of the ground and pumped out of the ground, and you know, energy and water and everything, all of that was waste. 96% waste to make a 4% product. And that is just outrageous, don't you think? Like, as humans, we're pretty smart. We ought to be able to do a better job. So if we're at 94 to 96% waste, there's a lot of room for improvement around this eco-efficiency component. So having said that then, but there's a certain point at which you improve and improve and improve and improve, and then you get this law of diminishing returns. It costs more to improve to the next level. And that's where eco-effectiveness comes in. This is all about design, designing things better, making sure that the way that we do things makes more sense. And we only need to look at nature to kind of figure out how we ought to design things, because nature is very, very efficient. It does not waste things the way that we do. So one of the things that nature does is all of the energy on the planet comes from the sun in nature. So we need to figure out ways to green up our energy streams over the long term. So that's kind of the number one thing that we'll have to do over time. Number two is, in nature, there is no waste. In nature, waste is equal to food for another stream. And I've heard some of you talk about how you're doing that. You know, you're taking your fat and you're taking it to a farm. In some places, they're taking it and they're turning it, restaurant fats, into fuel for cars and whatnot. So we're starting to see. So in nature, we work in closed loops. And if you think about this, a leaf falls from a tree. That leaf isn't garbage. It falls to the ground, and worms and other bugs pick it up, and they chew it up as food, and they turn it into nutrients that are then further manufactured by microorganisms and then taken up into the soil by the trees and the plants. So we have that closed loop process. Well, we can do the same thing as humans within the manufacturing processes, whether it's restaurant, whether it's making stuff. And in fact, there are places in Europe where within a specific town or industrial site, you know, the waste from one company goes to be the input for another company that goes to, and then it kind of continues on in that process, so that we have those closed loops. And then this final, and you're already into this because you're in the service industry, but we need to go from producing more products to more services. And what I mean by that, I'll give you an example of interface carpet. So interface carpet is one of the most leading industrial manufacturers in North America around trying to be green. About 20 years ago, they decided that they would be a carpet manufacturer that produced zero waste. And they're on this, 2020 plan to do that. They would be very happy if they never sold another square of carpeting. That's in their business plan. They never want to sell another square of carpeting because they're into carpet tiles. But they'll lease it to you. They'll lease it to you. They'll let you put it down on the floor. In 20 years or 15 years or whenever it's done, they want to take it back. Why do you suppose they want to take it back? Why is that important? It's because it's a resource that they're going to make into more carpet tiles. It's like having their own little oil factory or their own oil refinery, so that it makes a lot of sense for them to keep control of that resource so they can take it back, make it into more carpet tiles. And so you start to see end of life, which is tied into this closed loop piece coming into consideration, because we want to be able to reuse those resources. So greening up our energy, getting into closed loop, moving from products to services are some of the design features that we're going to see in this eco-effectiveness. And eventually to be eco-restorative. The idea is in the future that all of our restaurants will be water filtration plants and energy plants. And we'll be able to take the compost and we're going to actually make food from our compost. We won't actually maybe do that, but we'll sell it to farmers, or it'll go to farmers. And so it'll be all part of that closed loop process. So that's the idea of kind of sustainability and where we're going in the future. But we have a lot of misconceptions around what it means to be green, and a lot of people will tell us that it's actually too expensive. But the reality is that it's not nearly as expensive as we think.